Hello and welcome to my garden. So right now I am feeling like I have to do everything at once. It's really heating up here at the end of May and all of my plants are coming up like crazy. I've expanded my garden beds and borders this year so that I could of course plant more plants. And I thought it would be a great time to take you on a little tour of my garden so you can see where it's at and also talk about an idea called matrix planting that I think will really help you if you're trying to figure out a way to organize the layout of your garden as well as make it feel more abundant and full of plants. So in the last few years, I've really begun to embrace the idea of matrix planting in my garden. I like to plant a lot of perennials or other long-lived plants, and so the matrix design works really well for this. Basically, the idea with matrix planting is that you're planting your plants in blocks, groups, or masses. So a lot of what I'm doing in my garden these days is inspired by a Dutch designer named Piet Oudolf. He's pretty famous for doing both public and private gardens around the world in which he uses perennials and other grasses as the foundation and structure of his gardens. So this seemed kind of revolutionary at the time, a few decades ago, to actually make herbaceous perennials and other grasses the primary foundational element and structure of a garden, rather than focusing on traditional methods like using evergreens and other trees as the structure. It was less formal, but had a sort of hidden formality to it. I've also included a link to my Substack newsletter, which I wrote a little brief article about this idea of matrix planting, and I talk about Piet Oudolf in that article as well. So check that out. I included the link below. So there's a few advantages to planting on the matrix, which I will talk about as I take you around today. So why don't we get going? Okay, I'll just show you a new bed here that I just started this spring. I actually did a video on this with my no-dig gardening method, and I wanted to expand this garden so I could plant a lot more plants in here, and I'm using the matrix method right now. So here is the garden bed. This is actually surrounding a crabapple tree that's just finished flowering for the season. It's called Sugar Time. And I found because my arborvitaes, which are right here, have grown a lot larger and wider, so I wanted to expand the border. But I started using just a few perennials in groups that are going to become the central theme in my garden, and eventually I'm going to be putting them in different spots and repeating them around my garden. With the matrix method, it's optimal to actually space them fairly closely so that you can eventually knit them together. And then they look like a whole mass of plants rather than just a line or a separated few plantings in your garden. And if you're wondering how to divide your plants so that you can make more to do the matrix method, I have a video about dividing plants called free plants. So check that out. I'll put the link up here for you on that too. So I think there's so many benefits to using the matrix method in your garden. First of all, I think it's really good for gardeners on a budget. You can use just a selected number of plants or a selected type of plants to use for this method. You don't need a huge diverse array or collection of plants to create this big impact. Another advantage of planting with the matrix method, especially if you're using perennials or even drought-tolerant grasses, they're going to knit together, they're going to block the soil so that all those weeds don't keep coming up, and they actually help to hold in moisture. So even though it's good to still use things like compost and mulch to keep that moisture in, you may not need as much when you've got big masses of perennials covering the ground and keeping that moisture in. And another benefit to planting with the matrix method that I have personally seen in my garden, when I use perennials, especially flowering perennials and other grasses, in masses, blocks, and groups, that I'm attracting certain kinds of pollinators and wildlife to my garden year after year. So when you plant this way, you're really providing a reliable resource for them. So I am growing a lot of plants from seed, and I will be filling in those bare areas before the end of summer. And so by next year, I should have a pretty filled out garden with without a lot of gaps in between my plants. So you can create these kind of ideas with masses and groups with more naturalistic kind of plantings too. This is my mini woodland garden in progress. This year I've had great success with columbines. These are the native Echinacea canadensis. And they're super duper this year and creating a huge mass, which again creates that big effect. So it doesn't have to be a super formal kind of planting. You can do this with more informal groups of plants too. Here's another example of more catmint and other lamb's ears and groupings of plants around my pond. And I've got a variety of things, but I'm using that theme of catmint again. This is a different kind called cat's meow, which is a little bit smaller than the ones I had in the other bed, which are called Walker's Low. Again, I've got a group of 3 penstemons. These are called dark towers. And I've been dividing these and repeating these as well throughout the garden. Now, if you want to start this kind of planting style, you just need 3. And I say 3 because I think a group of 3 works really well in the sense that you can create space in between the 3 and you could interplant with different accent plants or plants that will contrast or complement those. And so if you've just got a singular plant or a line of plants, it doesn't really create that massing effect. But if you've got an odd number, you can create and plant out those little spaces in between your groups of plants. And so I've got more penstemon over there by my physocarpus summer wine. And you can see more lamb's ears over there as well, and sedums mingled in with Monarda. This one is called coral reef, which has really beautiful kind of pinkish orangey corally flowers. I've also got a big mass of eryngium called blue kalpa, which I grew from seed and it's really taken off over here. I think it really loves this spot. This is heading towards my pond this way, and it's actually becoming a bit much, so I might have to trim that back. And we're heading towards a new garden bed that again I am expanding out this year and making some changes to. So I have a lot of bare areas to start mingling new plants. I've got a group of 3 Sioux Blue Sorghastrum grasses. These get really, really big. They don't look like much right now, but they're going to be giants. And as you can see beyond, I've got my newer pond that I'm hoping to turn into more of a shady pond at some point. All of the plantings are pretty new, so it's still fairly sunny yet. So I am able to get by with having things like Siberian irises and daylillies and peonies, and I even have a rugosa rose over there that I grew from seed. But that may change as it gets to be more shady. And if you're interested in learning more about gardening or you want to connect with me, I highly recommend that you come and join my community at the Gardener's Companion. It's a free newsletter and it's a free community to join. I'll put the link in my description, so I hope to see you there.